You know, it seems like only a few days ago when I sat down to watch the Nintendo Switch presentation, waiting to see what the next system had in store, and I was not disappointed. But hard as that is to believe, that was over 4 years ago, and we're now officially in the second half of the Switch's life. So today, let's take a look at the Switch so far and see just how far we've come. Without further ado, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Carno. You know, as a Nintendo fan, it's kinda great to see Nintendo doing well, especially after their previous mistakes. But speaking of which, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's rewind to 2016. The Wii U was a massive failure, and despite it actually having some neat games, it was clear that it was time for a reboot. So in the fall of that year, Nintendo unveiled its next big console, the Switch. Now, I wasn't actually there when the video dropped, but I did see it later that day, and man was it exciting. Of course, I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but this trailer was better than any ad they'd released for the Wii U, and people took notice. All eyes were on them when in January of 2017, they live-streamed the Nintendo Switch presentation. That countdown held attention that I still remember today. Of course, we learned information about the system itself, but we also got reveals for big titles like Mario Odyssey, Splatoon 2, and of course The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I've said this before, but this is probably my favorite trailer Nintendo's ever released. And with the Switch coming out just 2 months later, a new era of Nintendo was about to begin. Now, what I'll be doing from here on out is going through each year, from March to February, going over a few highlights, then giving it a score. At the end, we'll see how each year compares against the other and view its life as a whole. Of course, I'll give my own opinions on some games too, but keep in mind that I mostly stick first party. Now, of course, the big launch title was Breath of the Wild, and it was basically the only game anybody cared about for a while. Of course, there was 1-2 Switch, but nobody really paid much attention. But only a month later, Nintendo released a Direct. After we got some 3DS stuff that honestly everyone was mostly waiting to get over with, we got details for ARMS, Splatoon 2, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and a few Switch accessories. We also got a few third parties, but the support hadn't fully kicked in yet. And around the same time, ARMS, Splatoon 2, and Pokken Tournament DX got their own separate presentations. Overall, I'd say the first few months of the Switch were pretty strong, especially with Mario Kart launching so quickly. Pretty much everybody was talking about this thing, and it was clear that the Switch had Nintendo's full support. And this didn't stop with Nintendo's E3 Spotlight. This was actually the first E3 I tuned in live for just for Odyssey alone. And I gotta say, this presentation was spot on. I don't think there were any major slow points in the presentation, even if I didn't personally care about Xenoblade 2. I think my favorite part though was when Nintendo showed just how easily they can break the internet with a single logo. Seriously, at the time, I didn't know much about Metroid, but everyone else seemed to be jumping out of their seats, in some cases literally. Even the Mario plus Rabbids game looked awesome, and I actually did end up picking it up. So anyway, ARMS and Splatoon 2 launched that summer, and in September, we got our third Direct. It didn't show off much new, but that didn't really matter because in the next few months, we got Pokken DX, Super Mario Odyssey, that weird anime game from Smash Bros, along with an expansion pass, and Breath of the Wild DLC, or at least a second part. You see, it was actually split into 2 chunks, with the first arriving in summer and adding a master difficulty along with some side quests. But this second half was the part people really were excited for, as it promised to show us more about the main story. In fact, they dropped it on the night of the Game Awards, while also announcing Bayonetta 3. Nintendo was really on fire. Now, January is usually a pretty tame month, but we still got a Direct Mini giving us some previews of what we had in store for the year. And while it wasn't as strong as the others, it was still pretty good. But most of the stuff didn't come until after March, so I'll save it for later. I'm pretty sure this goes without saying, but 2017 was pretty legendary. Every month, it seemed like there was something new to play, and even though I only picked up a few of them, there just seemed to be this air of excitement. Yeah, maybe Xenoblade wasn't for you, but there was Mario, Splatoon 2, Zelda, and even more on the way. No matter who you were, you pretty much had something new to play or at least look forward to. As for me, I didn't manage to get a Switch until that August, but I played most of the essentials, Mario Kart, Splatoon, Mario Odyssey, and even the Zelda DLC on my Wii U. But I also tried a few new things too. Like I mentioned earlier, I ended up trying Mario plus Rabbids and even got the third Jackbox Party Pack, which pretty much meant I became the local party entertainer for a while. I also had some leftover funds on the eShop, so I impulse bought Sonic Mania. Unfortunately, I never actually sat down and played it all the way through, so my experience was more so broken up over the next couple years, and I don't remember a lot of it too well. But it's definitely something I'll return to in the future. So needless to say, this year gets a solid 10 out of 10. It was pretty much perfect with next to no complaints. There were still some worries about Nintendo's upcoming online service, but for the moment, it was free and most games ran well enough. Not great, mind you, but well enough. When people ask what an ideal Nintendo release schedule would look like, I point to this. Even something like 3/4 of these games would have been great. But with all this momentum, where would Nintendo go next? Well, let's talk about 2018. To fully map out this year, we need to step back a bit to the January Direct. You see, after that banger of a year, it was clear the first few months of 2018 would be a little slow, and understandably so. The only new games were Mario Tennis Aces and Kirby Star Allies, which were launching that spring. In particular, we got Pokken DX DLC packs, a new adventure for Mario plus Rabbids, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, and representing the third parties, Dark Souls Remastered. Like I said, it was alright, but there was clearly more to show, or at least we hoped there was. Well, anyway, skip back to March, and we got the second Pokken DX pack along with Kirby Star Allies. But more importantly, that month Nintendo held what might be the best Direct they've ever had. Going down a list of games, we got Octopath Traveler, which was a third-party timed exclusive, more info on Dark Souls, Mario Tennis Aces, Undertale, Captain Toad, Hyrule Warriors, ARMS news, a giant Splatoon 2 update, the Octo expansion, and even more. But greatest of all, we got a teaser for Smash Bros. Coming that year. This was another one of those moments where everyone's minds were blown. Of course, there were some people who thought Smash was the only interesting thing, but remember, we were still in March, so they still had time to announce at least one more big title. In the months leading up to E3, we got Tennis Aces, Hyrule Warriors, and a surprise drop for Nintendo Labo. These were cardboard construction kits that let you make different Switch peripherals, and everyone agreed they were really neat, but overpriced, then proceed to forget about it in like a month. Honestly, besides those two games, things were a lot quieter this year. We got an announcement for Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which were Gen 1 remakes, but even that was a fairly divisive game. So naturally, everyone tuned in during E3 to see just what Nintendo had in store for the rest of the year. Unfortunately, the only new thing was Super Mario Party. Now granted, at the time, people were pretty hype, and with an October release date, there wasn't too long to go. But still, it was kinda disappointing that the majority of the presentation was about Smash. Like, don't get me wrong, this game looked hype, but they went into so many details that they easily could have just made its own direct after a shorter segment. Well, at least the summer was eventful enough. Octo expansion released the next day, which was pretty hype to see. And on top of that, the Mario plus Rabbids DK adventure released shortly after. Captain Toad and Octopath Traveler also released in July, and combined with the Smash Bros. Direct in August, things finally seemed to be moving again. September rolled around, and Nintendo gave us yet another Direct. This one wasn't so much to show off stuff coming that year, but more so to give us a peek into 2019. And it wasn't a bad one. Luigi's Mansion 3, another update for Splatoon 2, Animal Crossing in 2019, and even more third-party support like Final Fantasy. Of course, the big deal this time was Nintendo Switch Online. Up to this point, we had pieced together a pretty good picture on what it would look like, but that didn't mean we had to like it. Nintendo had stayed relatively silent about the topic until now, so this was their final chance to make that push. And the trailer was not great.
Members will also receive special offers. What are they? We'll have more to announce in the future.
To be honest, it was more so the stuff they didn't tell you that annoyed people. You can play games online, but you don't get servers, so if your connection isn't stable, or if you have NAT type D, you're SOL. Or how about those special offers? They told us nothing except expect updates in the future, pretty much confirming nothing much worthwhile. But this subject has been beaten to death by multiple people, including me, so I'll move on. But that wasn't the only bad news that fall. Remember Super Mario Party? Yeah, people got pretty hyped until they saw more details. Only 4 boards, questionable game design, online play that featured only 10 mini-games. Yeah, this went from a must-buy to a no-go for me once I saw the reviews. Of course, that didn't mean it sold terribly. In fact, it's still on the top 10 list, which I just don't understand. But that November, we got the Pokemon Let's Go games, Xenoblade 2 DLC, and our final Smash Bros. Direct before the game released just a month later. And they even revealed the Joker as a bonus fighter at the Game Awards, so that was pretty hype. Now, after the holidays, one would think news would be slow, but actually, not only did we get new Super Mario Bros., but a few different announcements. First of all, we got a bit of a sad one. Due to unsatisfactory results, development of Metroid Prime 4 was essentially restarted, meaning that we'd have to wait a couple more years at least to get it. Honestly, as sad as this news was though, I'm glad they took the time to make sure their product was quality, and it seems the delay went over pretty well. But luckily the other news updates were better. First off, a February Nintendo Direct showing off Mario Maker 2, a new Box Boy game, a Link's Awakening remake, Captain Toad DLC, and a new IP, Astral Chain. And as a special exclusive for NSO members, we also got Tetris 99, which is basically regular Tetris, but turned into a battle royale. I love it. So overall, a pretty good preview for 2019. But that wasn't all. Just a few days before the year closed, we got a Pokemon Direct showing off Sword and Shield. Yeah, remember when these games weren't steeped in controversy? Nice times. Overall, 2018 was a mixed bag. I feel like there were more directs than games, and that's probably because a lot of the schedule was padded with ports and DLC. Like, take this year's lineup and only count new titles. We're pretty much left with Kirby and Mario Tennis for spring, Octopath Traveler for summer, and then Mario Party, Pokemon, and Smash at the end. Compare that to 2017's list, and you can see how some people, especially Wii U owners, were a little bummed out. I think the Switch is in a special position right now because the last console was so bad that not many people got to play its games, but I think there should have been at least 1 or 2 more games released, and they should have been more spread out too. At least the DLC they released was pretty awesome. As for me, I skipped out on Tennis Aces, but caved and got Tropical Freeze since I really wanted to try it out. Yeah, I know I probably could have found a physical copy on the Wii U, but at least the game was amazing. Like seriously, if you haven't tried DKC Returns or Tropical Freeze, you should really hunt those things down. I also enjoyed Splatoon and Mario plus Rabbids DLC that summer, and of course I had to play Smash Bros when it came out. Honestly, it's the most invested I've been in any Smash entry, and it's naturally become a go-to multiplayer game. I also got Jackbox 5, which I enjoyed quite a bit too. And last but not least, we can't forget Tetris 99. But on the whole, I didn't play too much this year, especially during the first 6 months or so. It was clear that after the previous one, this was kind of a breather year for Nintendo. Again, a couple more games would have been preferred, but I think the year was a bit more empty for Wii U fans than others. 7 out of 10. But moving on, we're now entering the 3rd year of the Switch's life, 2019. Right off the bat, we got the Captain Toad DLC and Yoshi's Crafted World, which everyone immediately forgot about. Like, it wasn't that the game looked bad, but it just seemed kind of forgettable. I played the demo, but it didn't seem like a $60 game to me. In April, Box Boy plus Box Girl released, which certainly looked nice, but around the time, we got some sad news. Reggie was retiring and leaving Nintendo of America. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm happy for the guy and I know he's continuing to be very active in the industry, but you just don't get it. This man was a meme goldmine. Even Doug Bowser, who replaced him, hasn't come close when we've seen him at all. But anyway, after that, we got a Mario Maker 2 Direct in May before the big E3 showing that year. Speaking of which, the presentation was mostly showing off games we already knew about. We got Hero and Banjo for Smash, a closer look at Luigi's Mansion 3, Animal Crossing was delayed till March 2020, and we got a formal introduction to Doug Bowser. It was fun seeing a skit from Nintendo for the first time in years, although it didn't go very far with the meme. Like, I think it would have been funnier to see Bowser storm Nintendo HQ and take over before Doug defeats him. Oh, sorry, am I focusing too much on the memes? Well, there wasn't really much new in the presentation except... And this is why you don't count Nintendo Directs out till the last minute. I mean, to be honest, it wasn't like we didn't expect this thing to happen eventually, but it was still awesome. I really like how dark the trailer looked, and it gives me hope that they'll place a bigger emphasis on story this time. But moving on, Mario Maker 2 released later that month, and the hype was certainly real, although it did seem to die off quicker than a lot of people expected. Here's something interesting. In July, Nintendo unveiled the Switch Lite, which acts as a dedicated handheld version of the Switch. And I know I'm not the first person to point this out, but I find it funny how they made a Switch that can't switch. But it's not the biggest deal, and you gotta respect the appeal to the broke college students of the world. Back on track though, the rest of the summer wasn't quite done yet as we got Fire Emblem, Astral Chain, and a minor Switch revision before the quarterly direct in September. Now, controversially, a lot of fans were a little disappointed by this one, mainly due to the fact that we got almost no glimpse into 2020, so it was mostly just games we already knew about, at least when it came to first-party ones. At least we got Super Nintendo games added to NSO. You know, for as mediocre as the service is, at least they didn't charge extra. But anyway, they released the Switch Lite that month, then wrapped up the year with Link's Awakening, Luigi's Mansion, and Pokemon, which went on to sell insanely well. Plus, we got the announcement that joining Smash would be none other than Terry from Fatal Fury. Just what is Fatal Fury? To be honest, I know next to nothing about this franchise. But anyway, holiday 2019 was fairly busy, so it's kinda nice to have a breather month for January. Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE Encore released. That name rolls right off the tongue. We also got a Pokemon Direct which revealed a mystery dungeon port that March, and DLC for Sword and Shield coming later that year. And that was pretty much it for the year. I feel like this was better than 2018, although it still could have been better. I think in particular, the schedule could have used some balancing. Mario Maker 2 was pretty much the first big game released, and everything else before that just kinda felt like empty space. I will say though, I'm glad the majority of the year was new games instead of ports and DLC. Now, besides playing Tetris 99, I finally got around to playing Crypto the Necrodancer. I know I'm late to the party, but I saw it on sale and decided to finally pick it up. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. The mechanic is interesting, the music is awesome, and it's tough as nails. In fact, as of writing this video, I still haven't beaten it. It's definitely one of those games where I find it more enjoyable to pick it up every now and then instead of binging it. Speaking of being late to the party, I also tried Deltarune. Obviously this was just chapter 1, but I'm interested to see where the rest of the story will go. But I also got Mario Maker 2 when it came out, and Luigi's Mansion 3 that holiday. Besides that, I mainly tried some SNES games since I figured I was paying for them anyway. And last of all, I picked up Monopoly. Now, I've noticed Monopoly is one of those games where you either love it or hate it. I haven't really met anyone with neutral feelings. I happen to be one of those people who love it, and it was great to finally have a version to play online. In fact, I still play it every now and then. That is assuming the game doesn't soft lock. Anyway, those were my Switch pickups. Not a lot I know, but I'm not one to build up much of a backlog, and I'd say I got my money's worth out of all of these. As for the year in general, I'd give it an 8 out of 10. And keep in mind, it's not that I find it barely better than 2018, but I feel like if they evened out the schedule a bit more and got Animal Crossing out on time, it would have been a perfect score. But it turns out Nintendo was lucky to release that game when they did, because 2020 was... well, you don't need me to tell you. Right out of the gate, we got Pokemon Mystery Dungeon and Animal Crossing New Horizons. Honestly, an amazing game that really kept people occupied for a while. It didn't matter if you were into the series before now, you were pretty much obligated to play it. Honestly, logging onto Twitter and seeing everyone share their experiences was really cool for me, and it gave a sense of unity with the community that I hadn't seen since Smash. And not even a week later, we got a Nintendo Direct Mini, albeit somewhat void of new titles. It started off with a new trailer for Xenoblade Remastered, then moved on to some third parties. Sprinkled in there, we also got Good Job, Clubhouse Games, and a few updates to existing games like Ring Fit Adventure. Needless to say, I think a lot of people were disappointed. Even the ending trailer, which is usually the most hype moment, was just a recap of the new Pokemon DLC. So besides Xenoblade, Clubhouse Games, and Pokemon, what else did Nintendo have planned for 2020? Well, April soon passed with no news, and for the first couple weeks of May, it seemed like Xenoblade would be the only interesting thing happening. But out of the blue, Nintendo dropped a reveal trailer for a new Paper Mario game. And what's more, it was set to release just 2 months later on July 17th. Now, besides the shock that they announced a relatively big title with almost no notice, the other significant thing here was a controversy that came out of the fanbase. No doubt it was amplified because everyone was at home, but still it seemed the fanbase was torn over what to think of this new title. Some said it looked too modern, while others said it looked like the right direction for the series. And this went on for the next few months, which basically meant everyone forgot about Clubhouse Games. And I mean, was it really that surprising? If I wanted to play Solitaire, I'd play it for free on my computer. But yeah, for the record, I'll say that was released in June, along with the first wave of Pokemon DLC and Min Min as the 7th Smash DLC fighter. Now, before we go on, I think it's best to look at the current mindset of the community right now. We're halfway through 2020, and besides a decently sized spin-off franchise, we haven't seen anything too interesting since March. Not only that, but we have no idea what the company's plans are for the remainder of 2020. Unfortunately, the time we normally find out about this sort of thing was at E3, which got cancelled. People were getting impatient, including me. Well, don't you worry because Nintendo's got you covered. At the end of July, they released the first of many partner showcases. These were like Nintendo Directs if you took all the boring third-party stuff that everyone forgets about and made it its own video. And for the sake of brevity, I'll just say it now, we got 4 of these over the next few months. Even if they technically got better, they still didn't show any exciting games except for some very specific niches, so most people didn't care. Like, wow, a Kingdom Hearts spin-off? It looks perfectly fine. Anyway, August went by with no game releases, and the only announcement being the reveal of a Pikmin 3 port via Twitter. By the time September rolled around, I'm pretty sure everyone had just kind of given up. Nintendo didn't have any major titles coming for the rest of the year, and they decided to just coast on Animal Crossing sales. And that was when Nintendo finally decided to speak up. Out of the complete blue, on September 3rd, Nintendo released a Direct specifically aimed at Mario's 35th anniversary. There were some smaller things like Mario 35 and a Mario Kart remote car set, but the main attractions were an enhanced port of Mario 3D World and the 3D All-Stars collection launching just a couple weeks later. Of course, this thing had been rumored about basically all year, but still was pretty exciting, until we saw the fine print. The collection, along with Mario Bros. 35, would only be available until March 31st, 2021. Now, they claim this was because it was supposed to be a special occasion, but honestly I feel like if they really wanted to make something special, they'd do more than just dump a few ROMs on a cartridge and sell it for full price. But in the end, it ultimately didn't matter too much because even though fans complained, a lot of them still bought it and the game sold crazy well. Meanwhile, Zelda fans were in for a more pleasant surprise because only a few days later, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity was announced, slated for a November release. And basically, it was a hyped up spin-off game that aimed to expand a story of Breath of the Wild. It was an interesting concept, and a lot of people seemed to be on board. So anyway, October brought us Pikmin and Pokemon Wave 2, and November brought us Zelda. Overall, a decent combination to round out the holidays. One thing I will say though is a lot of people seem to just forget about Pokemon. Maybe I'm just not in the hardcore community, but I wonder how many people actually bought the DLC. Speaking of DLC, you want to know how Nintendo broke the internet with one video again? Well, look no further than the reveal trailer for Steve in Smash Bros. Ultimate. Twitter literally crashed. As the 8th DLC character, it was basically one of those predictions that a lot of people kind of discarded. But nope, we certainly live in a wacky timeline. And what's just as crazy was in December, Sephiroth joined the battle too. Perhaps 2 of the most significant additions in recent Smash history. But anyway, we're in the home stretch here. January was a breather month per usual, but February gave us Bravely Default 2, Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, and a 50-minute Nintendo Direct, which was the first presentation in over 500 days. And wouldn't you know it, a lot of people were disappointed. Okay, so the main takeaways here were Pyre & Mythra for Smash, Mario Golf, a few smaller and third-party games, Skyward Sword HD, and to round it out, Splatoon 3. Now, as much of a crime as it is, there are quite a few people who aren't into Splatoon, so besides Smash, Zelda, and Mario Golf, there wasn't a lot for them to love here, and the entire thing felt kind of bloated. But even so, it still gave us a decent look into what's in the immediate future. So to recap this year, it was one of the worst years so far. The highs were certainly there, but the lows hit rock bottom. There were great titles like Animal Crossing, Hyrule Warriors, and arguably Paper Mario, but there were quite a few dead months, and in general it kind of felt like we never knew what to expect the next month, and not in a good way. And I get Nintendo had trouble due to world events, but still, it was kind of a rough time being a Nintendo fan. As for me, this was when I really started exploring new games, especially on PC. But to keep it focused on Switch, I of course played Animal Crossing when it came out, and that kept me occupied for a while. But I also kept practicing some old games like Mario Kart. I kind of forgot how fun this thing was. I also checked out Paper Mario when it came out, and even did a review about it. And you know what? As someone who skipped the past couple entries, I thought it was pretty good. Not as great as the originals, of course, but a solid game in its own right. I also picked up Celeste, which I finished, and by finish, I mean I made it to the top. I didn't even try to 100% it because honestly, the amount of patience I need just didn't seem worth it. Oh, and we can't forget about Mario 35. Always a fun time. And you know what? That was pretty much it. Like I said, it wasn't like I didn't play games this year, but I mostly turned to new experiences on Steam, or even some childhood favorites from the Wii and GameCube. So taking all that into account, I'll say this year was a 6 out of 10. Not horrible, but definitely the worst year so far. And with that, we're finally up to the present day, or at least the time of writing. It's kind of crazy to look back and see how far we've come in some areas, but barely moved in others. Even 4 years later, the Switch UI feels almost identical to how it did on launch day. And this wouldn't be an issue if it didn't feel so basic. And the features they choose to add seem almost deliberately minimal. Not to mention the eShop is actively worse than on Wii U. But I'm glad to see Nintendo's changed their direction in the past few years, and it'll be interesting to see where they go from here. And if I had to rank the years, I'd put 2017 on top, followed by 2019, then 18, and last of all 2020. Of course, that's just my opinion though, and I could see others having a different take depending on their own experiences. But speaking of which, what's your story with the Switch? Did you only get it recently, or have you been following it from day one? Until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.